Well, hello there. We're here for the pastor study, and we're in our series on the Benedict option. We're up to chapter 8 in the book, the Benedict option. I hope you're reading along and not just looking at the videos. We're also looking at some other books. I'll talk about those. The 8th chapter of the Benedict option focuses on subsistence labor. Now, this is not addressed in Strangers in a Strange Land, one of the other books we're doing, but it does get talked about to some extent in chapter 7 of Out of the Ashes. So this subject is covered in the Benedict option and in the book Out of the Ashes. So you might want to take a look at chapter 7 of that book as well. The subject is the meaning of work for the Judeo-Christian community and the kind of work which is sustainable in a culture that is controlling access to the professions. Now, historically, most Americans worked with their hands. They worked in farms, they were in factories, they were craftsmen, they were machine operators. Others were small business owners and service providers. And others went into the military or government jobs at the federal, state, or local level. For most people, a high school education was sufficient to get access to those jobs. There was a professional class that went to college and graduate school in preparation for work as doctors, lawyers, clergy, teachers, those kinds of things that required both education and licensing. In the last half of the 20th century, all of that changed. There was a push for all persons to go to college. This was to help people achieve the American dream. And associate degrees began to prepare firemen and policemen. Prior to that, high school education was adequate, and most families dreamed of their children going to college and having a career, not a job, a career. Now, one could make the argument that career focus makes family life more difficult, and a two-career household has other considerations that are problematic to a deep religious family life. But that's not the situation discussed in the Benedict option. It's about the likelihood that Christians may be actually pushed out of the professions. So, a theology of work helps us to understand that manual labor is not a curse from God. Many of the difficulties of work in this life are the result of the judgment of God on Adam in the garden. But there's a positive side to work and to labor. And the book of Ecclesiastes says several times that to eat and to drink and to enjoy the labor of one's hands, well, that is the gift of God. So being able to do something, manual work, and to get satisfaction out of that work, out of the actual working, is part of the gift of God. So work is honorable, and it's the intent of God for us to make a living, not to become wealthy and significant by our work, which is the goal of career in this culture. So the author of the Benedict option is suggesting that just as the early Christians under persecution were required to burn incense to the gods and to Caesar, effectively denying Christ as Lord, so the time may be approaching when to be educated, to be licensed to a profession, or get a business license, or to be unionized, a person may be required to endorse or engage in active support of something or someone that challenges the faith or practice of our religion. Now, I believe this is more than simply a possibility. I have been in meetings of organizations related directly to accreditation and licensing at the state level that have already specifically claimed that their goal and the intent is to rid their profession of religious Christians. So the day may come when those who believe and practice our faith will be discriminated against or persecuted within certain professions and businesses. So what can we do? Well, the Benedict option suggests the following. First, the author says, be prudent. Be wise enough to pick your shots. Don't become argumentative about every little thing that challenges our faith or practice. There are Christians today in the media who are fighting for their conscience, which they claim is biblical, but it's not a sound or theologically correct position. I think of some of the people who don't want to make a cake for a gender neutral marriage, but they'll make cakes for people who are uh, in third and fourth marriages. There's not a clear biblical issue. They have an emotional reaction. And that's not really about religious freedom. On the other hand, there are some issues where religious freedom and conscience really happen. So we have to be wise to know when to act and when not. Jesus said we're to be wise as serpents, harmless as doves. But often, as I like to say, we're dumb as an ox and like bulls in a china shop. So Jesus taught his disciples to go the extra mile when required. That going the extra mile changes the other person's attitude towards us. There's a time and a place to comply, and a time and a place to challenge, as Paul did when his rights were violated as a Roman citizen. But Paul did not respond because he was wronged and he had rights. His appeal to Caesar was to be able to further the gospel by speaking to the king directly. He was willing to die for his Lord, not his rights. So the second thing he says is we should be bold. We're not to suffer as evildoers, but if we suffer for the name of Christ, we're to do it with joy, not seeking deliverance, but knowing that our reward in heaven will be great. So there really is a time when we know that this is a serious religious issue. We are going to make a stand for Christ. And if we suffer for righteousness' sake and for Christ's sake, because that's what's being persecuted, not our being dumb in a no-dumb zone, then we are to do that with boldness and we are to do that with joy. Now, another thing he says is that we should think outside the box. He calls it being entrepreneurial. We need to consider doing small businesses, some work that we can do. I think we could even engage in some farming communities as a community of faith to provide. We could do repairs. There are a lot of things that can be done. There's less scrutiny for small business, though there's a lot of red tape, than you would get if you were going through accreditation or licensing by professional guilds where they want you to be politically correct. He says that we should buy Christian and that we should have Christian networks. Now, this buying Christian and connecting to Christians is really preferring one another. It means that we support each other. So if there's a Christian plumber, I might use him rather than another plumber. I'm not looking for the best deal, but I'm making sure that each of us in the community can make a living and care for our community. And those who are doing that can also, when there are widows and others who need their services, can provide those services really as tzedakah towards them. Remember, the church is not a building. It's a community of faith, persons throughout the world that need to use their gifting and their abilities to minister to one another for the common good. Now, one of the things he says that I think is very important is rediscover the trades. People who can work with their hands can barter and trade in a bad economy. And they're always in demand. There are certain things that just need to be done. People need things repaired. They need things built. So those trades might be a good place for us to go and to provide for ourselves and for our families. We seek significance and professional honor over making a living, then we miss the point. Many of the trades make a good living, and they can also minister to others with their skills. So I think this is great advice that he's given us. Finally, he says, plan on being poorer and marginalized. The Bible talks about the deceitfulness of riches and the evil of the love of money. These are major threats to Christians. And in our culture, it tends to assimilate us into chasing after financial security. But we have to remind ourselves that Jesus said, if we have food and clothing, therewith we're to be content. Now that's a low bar. If we have food and drink and we have clothing and shelter, we should be content. Everything above that is really gravy. The provision of God is for us to eat and drink and enjoy the labor of our hands. We're to seek first the kingdom of God. Those things will be added to us. But financial security is an illusion. And there are a lot of people who thought they were financially secure. And when storms happen or earthquakes happen or chronic illness happens, they find that their financial security is not as clear as they thought. So that illusion is a serious threat to our religious commitment. We need to seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and then know that God will provide for our needs. But those needs are at the level of contentment and not at the level of want or significance. So there's much to ponder there. And I hope this chapter gives you some thought, particularly those of you who are raising children, that we have to raise children to be prepared for what's down the road, not for what's in our past or even what's immediately in our present. So I hope you had time to think about that. You'll read that, and we'll look again next week at chapter 9. So until then, goodbye.